Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie. This is episode number 761 for March 31st, 2019. Coming up in a few minutes.
In whiskey, there's a real sense of history because can you remember what you were doing 32 years ago? You know, all the things that have happened while this whiskey has been sitting quietly aging and all the turmoil of the world that's been going on around it. And then you open the cask and suddenly it sees the light of day. So, you know, I think I've got the best job in the world.
This week, Dewar's unveiled its first new innovations in several years. While the Dewar's blends have always been double matured, Master Blender Stephanie Macleod added extra steps to the blending process to create the double-double range with 21, 27, and 32-year-old whiskies. More with Stephanie Macleod later on WhiskyCast In-Depth. I'll also have the What I'm Tasting This Week department, your voice, and much more. All on this episode of WhiskyCast.
WhiskyCast, brought to you by Redbreast, the definitive single pot-still Irish whiskey. Those in the know Redbreast.
From far beyond the wall comes a whiskey for those who face the oncoming storm and never stop walking. Winter is here. White Walker by Johnny Walker.
White Walker by Johnny Walker. Blended Scotch whiskey, 41.7% alcohol by volume. Imported by Diageo North America, Norwalk, Connecticut. Please drink responsibly.
As always, we'll begin with the news. It's brought to you by Highland Park. We'll start on Islay, where Bruichladdich announced plans this weekend to expand its operations over the next 4 years. The key part of the announcement is the plan to build an on-site maltings for the locally grown barley it uses. Right now, about 42% of Bruichladdich barley comes from the island, but all that barley has to be shipped to the Scottish mainland to be malted in Inverness and then sent back by barge to Islay. The project must still receive planning approval from Argyll and Bute Council. The distillery is hoping to have the maltings in place by 2023. Bruichladdich is also looking at new renewable energy sources for the distillery, including tidal and water turbines, along with biomass conversion. That's something many distilleries are already doing today by using bacteria to convert distillery waste products into methane gas that can be used to fuel boilers. There are also plans to build 4 new maturation warehouses over the next few years, and the distillery has acquired the neighboring 30-acre Shorehouse Croft to be used for experimental barley projects. No one from Bruichladdich was available for interviews this weekend, but we will have more on this story next time around. Let's update a story we brought you earlier this month. Sazerac's Barton 1792 distillery in Bardstown, Kentucky, remains shut down after a tank collapse. One of the beer storage tanks that holds wash before it goes into the stills collapsed and damaged 2 other tanks in the process. An estimated 120,000 gallons of wash was spilled when the tanks ruptured. 2 workers suffered minor injuries at the time and were treated and released from a local hospital. Sazerac confirmed this week that production will resume soon, but declined to provide any additional details on the accident or the investigation. In other news, we had lots of awards handed out this week. We'll start with Whiskey Magazine's Icons of Whiskey Awards Thursday night. Distell was named as Distiller of the Year, while Brian Kinsman of William Grant & Sons was named Master Distiller and Master Blender of the Year. Kentucky Peerless Distilling was picked as Craft Producer of the Year, and John Rockford of Australia's McLaren Vale Distillery was named Distillery Manager of the Year. Delilah's in Chicago was named the Whiskey Bar of the Year, and the Lakes Distillery in England was picked as the Visitor Attraction of the Year. Of course, those are just a few of the winners. We have a link to the complete list at the WhiskyCast website. Whiskey Magazine also presented its World Whiskies Awards Thursday night in London. For the first time, an Irish single malt took top honors as the world's best single malt whiskey. Teeling's 24-year-old Vintage Reserve won out over single malts from Scotland, Japan, and the rest of the world. Suntory's Hibiki 21-year-old was named the world's best blended whiskey, while the Four Roses 130th Anniversary Limited Edition Small Batch was named the world's best bourbon. Once again, we've posted a link to the complete list of winners at the WhiskyCast website, and congratulations to Macmira's Angela D'Orazio, who was the latest inductee into Whiskey Magazine's Hall of Fame Thursday night. Turning now to new whiskeys, the Glenrothes ditched its vintages last year in favor of a new range of single malts with age statements, and this week, Balblair did the same. The Inverhouse-owned distillery in Edgerton, Scotland, will be replacing all of its existing vintage-dated whiskies with a new core range of 12, 15, 18, and 25-year-old single malts, along with a new 17-year-old travel retail exclusive. Balblair has been known for its vintages for more than a decade, but distillery manager John MacDonald says that put their whiskies at a disadvantage in some markets.
Sometimes in certain markets, vintage was, some people thought it was a difficult concept to grasp. So by going to age statement, it's really what you see is what you get. The 12-year-old is very similar to the younger vintages we put out in the past. 65% second fill bourbon and 35% are double fired or dechar rechar. For the 15-year-old, it's 13 years, 6 months in American oak ex-bourbon, second fill, and then 2 years in first fill Spanish oak. And the 18-year-old is similar, only it being 15 years, 6 months in American oak, and then 2 years, 8 months in first fill Spanish. So very similar to 91 and 2000.
The range launched this week in the UK with prices ranging from £45, around $59 US for the 12-year-old, to £500, around $650 a bottle. They'll gradually be rolled out in other markets worldwide, including the U.S. The first chance to taste the new expressions comes this week. John MacDonald will be leading a tasting Tuesday night in London for the Whiskey Exchange at Smith & Wollensky's. Ben Riach is releasing its 25-year-old single malt in the U.S. It's one of the oldest whiskeys from the Speyside Distillery to be available in the U.S. market since Brown-Forman acquired the distillery in 2016. Master blender Rachel Berry created it from a range of casks, using everything from ex-bourbon hogsheads to French Burgundy barriques. Here's Ben Riach's Stuart Buchanan.
For me, it shows off the warehouse of Ben Riach very well. So you go into our warehouse, not only do we have the classic American barrels in maturation, sherry casks, also Ben Riach also has peated whiskey in the warehouse, triple distillation. This goes back to a good classic Speyside whiskey, but Rachel is actually utilising some of that, eclectic barrelling. So what we have in here, majority American oak, through the American oak hogsheads and bourbon barrels, and then she's put a little bit of red wine in here. So this little twist of red wine, for me, just changes what is the classic Ben Riach fruit-forward nature, being orchard fruits, apples, pears, apricots, or at this age sometimes even bits of pineapple. But then that little bit of red wine just tweaks that to kind of red berry jammy notes. Also, that will change that lovely, I'll give you a richer mouth texture, a little bit of tannins contrasting that sweetness. And she just really is building that fantastic layering of classic Speyside, great barrel interaction, and then just changing that fruit dynamics slightly. So, beautiful example.
The new Benriach 25-year-old will carry a recommended retail price of around $300 a bottle. Greg Glass has been quiet since leaving Compass Box to join White & Mackay as a whiskey blender a couple of years ago to work with Richard Patterson. That changed this week with the debut at Whisky Live London of the new Whiskey Works line from White & Mackay. It's a project Greg Glass has been working on for a while now, and there are 2 whiskeys in the debut release.
King of Trees is a blended Highland malt. So we're using 2 single Highland malts, one of which very unusually has been finished in a native Scottish oak cask, which was a combination of 2 very old trees from a Highland estate that were windfell. So these weren't actually cut down, these were windfell trees, and the timber has been air seasoned out in the open for 3 to 4 years. And this has been really a little pet project of mine, and really, if you like, a personal career ambition of mine since my early 20s was to work with Scottish oak and native oak, that particular one. And that has characteristics of kind of apple, pear, fruit quality, so lovely orchard fruit characteristics. And what the native Highland oak cask, which we very gently toasted, brings is a lovely top note, kind of spicy, soft spice quality and cinnamon element, which actually accentuates the natural beauty of the 2 Highland single malts that we combined together for that particular one. The second release that we have in this first wave is called 29-year-old Glaswegian, and that's from a now closed distillery that was originally in Glasgow. And the majority of the casks that I selected for that single grain were matured in dunnage warehousing. And it was actually from a couple of different dunnage warehouses that I selected these from. And that has beautiful kind of soft tropical fruit notes, as well as kind of creme brulee, vanilla, toffee notes to it. But although it's 29 years in age, it's still got a lovely freshness and beauty to it. And that one is bottled at cask strength at 54.2%, and King of Trees is at 46.5%.
Both whiskies will be available exclusively through the Whiskey Exchange in London for the next 2 weeks, then at other whiskey shops while they last. In the U.S., Diageo has released the oldest bullet expression yet, a 12-year-old rye whiskey. Like the original Bullet Rye, it's distilled at MGP in Indiana. It's bottled at 46% ABV and will be available in select U.S. markets for around $50 a bottle. Michter's is also out with a new rye, the first release of its US-1 barrel strength rye since 2016. It's bottled at 54.9% ABV and will sell for around $75 a bottle. I'll have tasting notes for both new ryes soon at whiskycast.com. Buffalo Trace has fans of the W.L. Weller wheated bourbons drooling on social media this week. It's releasing a new Weller Full Proof bourbon at 57% ABV. That's also the strength at which Buffalo Trace fills its wheated bourbon new make into barrels. It'll be available starting in June, with 1 limited release each year at a recommended retail price of $49.99 a bottle. Now, Monday is April Fool's Day, so make sure you change the batteries in your BS detectors. Last year, Tamworth Distilling in New Hampshire released Eau de Musk. We reported on this one back then. It's a whiskey infused with oil from the castor sacs of a beaver. You know, those little sacs right under a beaver's tail that produce what I referred to at the time as beaver butt juice. You may hear about their latest innovation this week, a new whiskey called Lait de Romaléa. The name sounds exotic, but it translates into milk of grasshopper. This stuff is what the eastern lubber grasshopper shoots out of its butt as a defense mechanism against predators. The Tamworth news release describes it as a, quote, brown skull-like exudate. Yum. Now, after they milk the grasshoppers by rubbing their abdomens, the milk is fermented with tea leaves and then distilled separately. This all sounds really appetizing, but the molecules in that milk are said to be very similar to the ones that give roses their smell, and the process unlocks that aroma, or I should say is said to unlock that aroma. Given that Tamworth actually did release Eau de Musc last year, this idea sounds just plausible enough to be possible. But when the release also said this whiskey would go on sale April 1st, nah. You won't find it in the TTB's label approval list. I looked, and a Tamworth spokesman confirmed that it is, in fact, an April Fool's gag. Though the idea is theoretically possible, grasshopper butt juice has not been approved for use in any food product, unlike beaver butt juice. Think about that the next time you're eating vanilla ice cream. Of course, there is one April Fool's whiskey that is real. The Jokers at Seattle's Westland Distillery will put Celebrius on sale Monday. It's a single cask, single malt that was matured for almost 4 years in New American Oak, then finished for 8 months in an ex-tequila cask. Only 206 bottles will be available, and you can see the video of me opening up the Overkill Celebrius press kit on YouTube and at our Facebook page. I'll also have my tasting notes for it in just a few minutes. You can keep up on the latest whiskey news all week long at whiskycast.com. The news is brought to you by Highland Park, the Orkney single malt with Viking soul. If you're planning a voyage of your own soon, make sure to look for something special from Highland Park on your journey. You might just find a single barrel Highland Park bottled exclusively for the region you're visiting. But you'll never know unless you look. Check out the Highland Park single malts at highlandparkwhiskey.com. Time now for the WhiskyCast calendar of events. If you're in the Philadelphia area, join us Friday night at the University of Pennsylvania Museum for the American Whiskey Convention, and you can use the discount code WhiskyCast10 to save 10% on your tickets. Spring is in the air, and MB Roland Distillery is holding its first Vintage Crafts and Cocktails Fair this coming weekend in Pembroke, Kentucky. The Rhein-Ruhr Whiskey Festival is also this weekend in Dusseldorf, Germany. Louisville's Oxmoor Farm has its first bourbon salon of the year, April 9th, with some of Kentucky's leading craft distillers. Whiskey Fest Washington, D.C. is on the 10th. The Whiskey Obsession Festival is in Sarasota, Florida, April 10th through the 13th. Buffalo Trace has its annual Easter at the Trace celebration on April 14th in Frankfort, Kentucky. The Nth is in Las Vegas, Nevada, April 26th and 27th, while the Whiskey Fair Limburg is on the 27th and 28th in Limburg, Germany. Right now, we have 200 different events on the searchable calendar of events at whiskycast.com. If you have a whiskey tasting, festival, or any other whiskey-related event coming up, just use the contact form on the website to let us know all about it. We'll be glad to add it to the list.
From deep in the north, far beyond the wall, the howl of the frozen wind brings word of something new. A whiskey from the land of always winter, for those who face the oncoming storm and never stop walking. Winter is here. White Walker by Johnny Walker.
White Walker by Johnny Walker. Blended Scotch whiskey, 41.7% alcohol by volume. Imported by Diageo North America, Norwalk, Connecticut. Please drink responsibly.
WhiskyCast In-Depth is brought to you by Lagavulin. Dewar's has a heritage among blended scotches that is hard to match, but it hasn't always taken advantage of that heritage in recent years, as global whiskey sales have taken off. The new Double range unveiled this week will not change that overnight, but it's a very good start. It's being described as the first real innovation from Dewar's in several years. But, in fact, master blender Stephanie Macleod used some of that Dewar's heritage to come up with the Double concept. She's only the 7th master blender in the nearly 175 years since John Dewar opened his wine and spirits shop in Perth. This week was her first trip to New York City on behalf of Dewar's.
We have, for our Dewar's 30-year-old, we actually finished in PX casks. And for Dewar's 25, although it's not really a finish in a way, but we put it into Royal Bruichladdich casks. So we've dabbled in it with blends, but this is the first time that we've really taken it and applied it to 3 new blends. And we've put each age statement into a different sherry cask. We wanted to come up with a play on double aging. What could we do to innovate around it? So all of the Dewar's blends are double aged, and for Dewar's 25 and Dewar's 30-year-old, we double age and we finish. So I really did wonder what on earth could I do to raise the bar, do something different. So I sought inspiration from the archives, and A.J. Cameron, our first master blender, blended the malts by their region, put them back into oak casks, let them sit for a while, and then blended them with the grain whiskies. So I thought, okay, and really from that, the 4-step aging process was born. So the first step is that the individual malts and grains are matured in their individual oak casks. Step 2 is we blended the malts together to form a blended Scotch whisky, a blended malt whisky, put those back into specially selected oak casks and back into the warehouse. Then we took the grains, blended those together to form a blended grain whisky, and put those into specially selected oak casks and put those back into the warehouse. A month later, we took them back out of the warehouse. The guys in the blend centre were hating me by this point. We disgorged the blended malt and the blended grain, and we brought them together as a blended Scotch whisky. We then put that back into specially selected oak casks and back into the warehouse. A month later, brought them back out again. So then we had the triple-aged blended Scotch whiskies, and we filled each age statement into a different type of sherry cask. So we looked at the inventory, we looked at where the pockets of stock were that were sustainable and that were interesting. We sampled them, made up some pilot blends, and then we came up with 21, 27 and 32. Now, each one of them has its own particular flavour profile. So it's not just a copy and paste of the 21-year-old recipe applied to the 27, applied to the 32. Each one represents a different facet of the Dewar's flavour profile. So it's really important to note that it's not just the same but older. They've all got their own particular character. And when I nosed and tasted all the variants, I felt that the 21-year-old would work well with the Oloroso. The 27-year-old, that was something different. And I'd never worked with Palo Catardo casks before. Now, perhaps now isn't the time to be messing about with experimenting with things, but I actually felt that I wanted to try something different. I felt that the brand deserved a bit of innovation. So we bought some Palo Catardo casks from Spain, brought them in, had a nose at them, and they were all excellent. So I put our precious 27-year-old into these casks and then kept my fingers crossed that all would be well. For the 32-year-old, that's the smokiest of the blends. And I thought that smokiness would go really well with Pedro Jimenez. And so that's what we did. And so each month I sampled the casks just to make sure that they looked good and that they tasted good, because we don't add any colour to these blends and they're non-chill filtered as well. So that was really what the thought was behind it and the process, and I'm delighted with how they've turned out. The 21-year-old is a compact, tight blend. Lots of vine fruits coming out from the Oloroso, some spice, some cinnamon, but also sort of caramel, shortcake notes and cocoa. The 27-year-old is a different beast altogether. It's really succulent. It's a much fuller whiskey than the 21-year-old. It's just sort of big in every way. And it's worked really well with the Palo Catardo because we've got these wonderful citrus notes coming through. And then the 32-year-old. So we've got this lovely smoky note coming through, but it's such a luxurious and really temptingly smooth whiskey. You know, lots of big, bold flavours coming through, lots of fruit, lots of spice, lots of treacle. Sort of really unctuous whiskey. So there's something there for everyone. And we put them into half bottle sizes. So something for every palate and perhaps something for every budget as well. You know, making these expensive, usually whiskies, maybe less so.
This is being billed as the first major innovation at Dewar's in a number of years. Give me a sense of the time frame it took to put all this together, because as you pointed out, the guys in the warehouse probably love you by now, but I'm betting this took a while to put together.
Not really. You know, we came up with the concept basically during a meeting. You know, I was really trying to think, what are we going to do? And, you know, during the meeting, as I was thinking, we came up with the concept, and then the longest part was waiting for the casks to come in. And then the fact that we weren't going to add colour to it, we had to ensure that there was a difference in colour between the 21, the 27 and the 32. So there was a big caveat on the project that if it hadn't reached the right flavour profile and the right look, the right appearance, then it wouldn't happen until it was exactly right. And everyone in the team was completely, you know, accepting of that and respected that that's what had to happen.
You mentioned going back into the archives and finding those notes about that early blending process. How often do you get to go back into the archives and come up with stuff like this?
Well, I mean, our archives are on site, so they're really just a few steps away. I don't get as much time to delve into the archives as I would like, but it's always fascinating to see this beautiful handwriting, you know, preserved in history. And we've got an archivist, Jackie Sargent, who guards these precious archives and doesn't let everyone in to see them. But it is fascinating, and to see the same whiskies that I use today for blending being used back then. So in whiskey, there's a real sense of history, because can you remember what you were doing 32 years ago? You know, all the things that have happened while this whiskey has been sitting quietly aging, and all the turmoil of the world that's been going on around it. And then you open the cask and suddenly it sees the light of day. So, you know, I think I've got the best job in the world. But, you know, that's just me saying that. But I don't think there's many people that get that opportunity to see something for the first time in so many years.
So how did you get this job? Where did you get your start?
With becoming a whiskey blender, it sometimes is being in the right place at the right time. But I did food science at University of Strathclyde, and I was fortunate that the department I was in had a link with the whiskey industry. And after a short spell in the soft drinks industry, my old supervisor from Strathclyde Uni said, "Would you like to come back and do whiskey research?" And I said, yes, I would. So I spent 4 years looking at the sensory aspects of whiskey and trying to determine what is it about the composition of whiskey that makes it taste the way it does, particularly looking at maturation. I'm happy to say that we never actually discovered what it is about whiskey that makes it taste the way it does, because now that I'm a blender, that's part of the joy of it. Because we've managed to control quite a bit about whiskey through science and observing the distillation process and observing maturation, but we never really know what we're going to get until you open the cask. So that's really, my background was in research, and after the 4 years I decided I really wanted to be in the whiskey industry, because I'd fallen in love with it at that point, because I didn't know anything about whiskey up until that point. And, you know, when I realised the impact of the wood and, you know, on the new make distillate, I then became engrossed in the subject of Scotch whisky.
Is blending an art or a science?
It's both. You know, there's certain aspects of it that, you know, we like to test every inch of the whiskey. So as well as the sensory part of it, we like to make sure that there's nothing in it that might affect the product in future years. But there's also an instinct in whiskey that you, after a while of dealing with the whiskies for so long, you then get to know, you know, what whiskey goes well with another whiskey, perhaps what type of cask might work better with a particular type of whiskey. Obviously, we have recipes written down, stored in our inventory systems for all of our blends, so that if something were to happen, then the brand can go on. So, but there is a definite marriage of science and art with whiskey.
So you've had to cough a couple of times during this interview, and nothing wrong with that, but what do you do when you get a cold?
Well, we have a sensory panel at Dewar's. So these are a group of people that have been trained in looking at what is the profile of Dewar's and then comparing that against what we then blend. So there's always a backup team that if I'm on holiday or I've got a cold, then there's someone else there. And I also have an assistant blender who noses everything with me as well. So there's always a backup plan.
Or when you're over here in New York, as you noted before we started, this is the first time they've let you out of the lab or sent you out on a promotional trip in all the years you've been working with Dewar's. Why did it take so long?
I don't know. I mean, obviously this one is quite an unusual one because it's 3 blends. and there's an extra element with the different aging profile. So the team here just thought it was the right time for me to come out. You know, I've been to other countries doing promotional tours, but, you know, Dewar's in the US has such a strong history, and, you know, I'm very proud that I am out here promoting our new blends because of that history. And I know that there's so many people that adore Dewar's, and you hear about people being buried with a bottle of White Label, and so there's a lot of strong emotions tied to it. So I was delighted when they asked me to come out and to show our new whiskies to an American audience.
We've seen almost an explosion in the number of women in the whiskey industry taking positions as master blenders, associate blenders, distillers. Do you see yourself as a role model?
That's quite it's quite a title. I do try to be. We have a mentorship program at Bacardi, and I'm always keen to bring on students to work with us, to see what it's like being in the whiskey industry, whether male or female. But I do want to show people that it is an industry that is open to everyone. There's absolutely no reason why women shouldn't be in it. And I guess with more and more women working and entering the workplace, Scotch whisky is one of the biggest employers in Scotland. And so it really is only natural that women would gravitate into Scotch whisky. And actually in the past, a lot of women were in the whisky industry. They started distilleries, and it wasn't really seen as a big thing. But now we kind of make more of it, that it's a woman blender, and it's good for the brand, but in a way it shouldn't really matter whether it's a man or a woman. And some people say, but women have got better palates than men, and I think there's probably more differences between the sex, in the sexes and between. Everyone's got different sensitivities, so I really wouldn't like to say that women are better at nosing than men, because I don't think it's true. But we're a unique industry because we all rely on each other to make our blends. So we're a small industry. Scotland's a very small country, but we've got this huge global brand. So we all work with each other to ensure that we're all making the best possible whisky that we can. If Aberfeldy is needing a spare part, a Diageo distillery might very well help them out. So, at the technical level, we are very supportive, very cooperative. When it gets out to the marketplace, it's a different story altogether. But we all work together, we all talk, and we don't reveal our marketing strategies, but we talk about, the challenges that we're faced when we're blending whiskies and producing whiskies. So it really is, I feel it's a unique industry to be in.
One final question. You mentioned going back through those archives of your predecessors and seeing all that beautiful handwriting. Does your handwriting hold up? What are they going to say 100 years from now?
Yeah, they probably won't be able to decipher actually what I've scribbled. Luckily, our inventory is now on a computer system. So provided that we manage to put it on to the next generation, then it should all be preserved. But yes, I hope nobody has to rely on my handwriting to decipher anything, because the recipes could be lost forever in that case.
The Double Double range will be available in limited quantities worldwide, including global travel retail. Thanks to Stephanie Macleod for spending some time with us on WhiskyCast In-Depth. Next time around, I'll sit down with Gary Haggart, the head distiller at Scotland's Lindores Abbey Distillery. WhiskyCast In-Depth is brought to you by Lagavulin, the legendary Islay single malt. Look for the new House Lannister Lagavulin 9-year-old. It's part of the Game of Thrones single malt Scotch whiskey collection from Diageo and HBO. You'll find it at a whiskey shop near you. Check out the rest of the Lagavulin single malts at malts.com. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Heaven Hill Distillery. And let's start off with a couple of the Dewar's Double Double whiskies. The 21-year-old is finished in Oloroso sherry casks, and it's bottled at 46% ABV. The nose has notes of black cherries, peaches, apricots, honey, and muted spices. The taste has good spicy notes, though, along with a touch of cinnamon candies and hints of honey, black cherries, and apricots. The finish long and fruity with gently fading spices. I'm scoring the Dewar's Double Double 21-year-old a 94. Now, the 27-year-old Palo Cortado finish was the one that made Stephanie Macleod a bit nervous, as she said during our interview. It's also bottled at 46% ABV. The nose has notes of peach nectar, apricots, a touch of dried rose petals, muted spices, and just a hint of honey. The taste is luscious, thick, and rich, with a citrusy tartness, white pepper, a hint of cardamom, and touches of honey, vanilla, and dried flowers in the background. The finish is long with a subtle fruitiness, muted spices, and just a touch of ginger. There's great complexity and balance here. I'm scoring the Dewar's Double Double 27-year-old a 94. I'll have more tasting notes in just a minute, but first, our tasting notes are brought to you by Heaven Hill Distillery. Keeping American whiskey history and tradition alive isn't just a marketing slogan, it's part of Heaven Hill's fabric. When other distillers were getting out of the rye whiskey business, Heaven Hill saved the legendary Rittenhouse rye from becoming a footnote in the history books. Today, it's the rye whiskey of choice, in a cocktail or neat, with a distinct spicy flavor all its own. Find out more at heavenhilldistillery.com. Think wisely, drink wisely. Now, let's look at the committee edition of Ardbeg Drum. It's bottled for members of the Ardbeg Committee at 52% ABV and will be followed in June by the regular release after Ardbeg Day during the Islay Festival of Malt and Music. Drum is finished in Caribbean rum casks. The nose has a sweet smokiness with hints of barbecue sauce, ginger, pineapple, and brine. The taste is smoky and tart, with lime and lemon notes, along with grilled pineapple and a sweet barbecue smokiness that fades to reveal hints of brine and dried flowers. The finish, long and tart with just a hint of smoke. I'm scoring the Ardbeg Drum Committee Edition a 92. The Macallan's new edition number 4 marks a key moment in the distillery's history. It's the first bottling for Nick Savage as the Macallan's new whiskey maker, as Bob Dalgarno transitions out of the role after many years. It's bottled at 48.4% ABV, and the nose has notes of figs, dates, toffee, pecan pie, and hints of molasses and brown sugar. The taste has good spices, balanced by figs, toffee, pecan pie, brown sugar, and just a touch of black cherries. The finish is long, with gently fading spices and hints of toffee and pecans. I'm scoring the Macallan edition number 4 a 92. Finally, Since it's April Fool's weekend, let's finish up with Westland Distillery's annual April Fool's whiskey. As I mentioned during the news, Celebrius is anything but a joke. It was matured for 47 months in new American oak and the final 8 months in an ex-tequila cask. It's bottled at 52.7% ABV. The nose light and floral with hints of lime, ginger, and green grapes. The taste has a good tartness with lime, ginger, a hint of tequila spirit, green grapes, and subtle spices. The finish, tart and citrusy. I'm scoring Westland's Celebrius Single Malt an 89. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Heaven Hill Distillery. I've added these tasting notes to our searchable list of more than 2,500 different whiskeys from all over the world. You'll find it at whiskycast.com.
Redbreast fans have always cherished our whiskey's sherry notes, so we set out to embellish that character. Introducing the Redbreast Listowel edition, a quintessential single pot still Irish whiskey finished in first fill Oloroso sherry casks from Spain's prestigious Bodegas Listowel. Carrying Redbreast's trademark pot still spices and dark dried fruit notes, the Listowel edition is graced with an enduring sherry finish that would be better described as a final act. Discover the newest branch on the Redbreast family tree.
Let's open up the inbox now for Your Voice, presented by Lot 40. The other day, I told the story of the worst whiskey that I've ever tasted at whiskycast.com, and just how I came to taste that herring cask-finished fishkey in a prank played by Balblair distillery manager John MacDonald.
You were one of the few people that reacted as I reacted when I tasted it.
I'm not sure that's a compliment,
Yeah,
but...
No, that's a huge compliment, Mark. Because, as you know, there's a few other people sitting at a table who will remain nameless that were saying, you know, this, that, and waxing lyrical about it. So,
and I was gagging.
Yeah. I'll never forget it, Mark. I'm sorry.
Nor will
I. It was
I.
a bit cruel, but you know, it was to my amusement that day. It really was.
Of course, the fishkey story sparked a lot of comments on social media. Gert Bureau posted on Facebook, "Tried this also long time ago. Crazy shit." Peter Silver added, "I even purchased a bottle after tasting it, but somehow that bottle got smashed at my home." Jimmy Milne posted this, "I tried that whiskey earlier the same day, I think, and whilst it wasn't good, I don't remember it being quite so gut-wrenchingly, vomit-inducingly awful. Very naughty of John to throw it into a tasting of some memorably wonderful Balblairs, though." On Twitter, Susanna at Irish Legs posted this, "I like the sneak attack and how some other tasters were, 'Oh, this is lovely.'" Now, if you heard our interview last year with Klaus Pinkernell, who decided to finish half of a Bruichladdich single cask in that herring barrel to create fishkey, he was doing it to send a message.
At that time, there was the real movement, or beginning of the movement, that everyone wanted to do some sort of finishing, and everyone wanted to be the first to do something even more strange. And I said, okay, folks, you call all these things serious, although they are stupid. And I decided to do something even more stupid.
Mark Rainier, who was running Bruichladdich at the time Klaus was bottling fishkey, tweeted this, "I may be wrong, but I thought it was a parody of the Bruichladdich additional cask evolution policy when we introduced wine casks that some thought heretical at the time." Well, Klaus is going to have to address that one for himself, but I think he was protesting the overall trend toward cask finishes rather than anything specific to Bruichladdich at the time. Finally, Heidi, whose Twitter handle I am not about to repeat, added this, "It's the surströmming of whiskey, and whoever did this should die in a cask of it after suffering 1,000 razor cuts." Now, surströmming is the delicacy that's popular with a certain percentage of the Swedish population. If you haven't heard of it before, basically it's canned herring that's allowed to ferment inside the can, and it's regarded as one of the most pungent foods on Earth. I'm not sure I'd go along with Heidi's suggestion here, but I would go along with adding a whiskey ban to the Geneva Conventions as cruel and unusual punishment for prisoners of war. Of course, this is all tongue-in-cheek now, but very much not an April Fool's joke. If you have something you'd like to share with whiskey or fishkey lovers around the world, you can always find us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at WhiskyCast. The email address is comments@whiskycast.com. Your Voice is presented by Lot 40, Canada's award-winning 100% pot still rye whiskey. Lot 40, unapologetically Canadian. Please drink responsibly. Time now for Behind the Label, our look at the history, science, and other stuff that all make whiskey unique. It's brought to you by Writer's Tears. Last time around, we answered a question about so-called STR casks, a unique way of treating red wine casks by shaving the top layer of wood off the inner staves, then toasting and recharring the cask. The late Dr. Jim Swan came up with the technique so that his clients could keep the red wine fruitiness in those casks while removing undesirable acidity that could affect the new make spirit being filled into those casks. That prompted some comments about a similar method for rejuvenating older casks that have been used a few times, the dechar-rechar process. This is a technique that's used mostly in Scotland, where a cooper will plane off the top charred layer of wood from the inside of an old bourbon cask in order to expose the fresher wood underneath. Then they rechar the barrel to caramelize more of the natural sugars in the wood. It's not a perfect process, though. Distillers say it results in something in between a first fill and second fill bourbon barrel, but with the high demand for fresh bourbon barrels these days, it is a way to get one or two more uses out of a barrel before scrapping it. And if you're looking at a description of the casks that go into some of Diageo's single malts, and you see a reference to rejuvenated casks, well, that is how they're rejuvenated. If you have something you'd like us to look at on Behind the Label, just use the contact form at whiskycast.com to get in touch with us. Behind the Label is brought to you by Writer's Tears.
Writer's Tears Copperpot, a unique triple distilled premium Irish whiskey, combining single malt and single pot still. First fashioned in the 1700s and still a rarity today. Sure, as we say in Ireland, what's rare is wonderful. Writer's Tears Copperpot.
Finally, we lost a couple of longtime whiskey veterans this week. Kentucky bartending legend and writer Joy Perrine died Monday after a long battle with cancer. She tended bar at Jack's Lounge and Equus in Louisville for decades and co-authored the Kentucky Bourbon Cocktail Book with Susan Riegler. She was inducted into the Kentucky Bourbon Hall of Fame back in 2016. And Joy was one of those people that I had always wanted to get on the show, but we just never managed to make it happen. Back in 2010, we met longtime Strathisla Distillery veteran Tommy Smith back in episode 269. He spent 27 years working at the distillery, then became a tour guide after taking what he called early retirement. According to Ian Logan of Chivas Brothers, the Chivas Regal 18 and 25-year-old whiskeys available today are blended with Strathisla that Tommy Smith distilled back in the day. If you've ever talked with distillery veterans from those days, one topic that always seems to come up is dramming. In today's terms, we'd call it quality control. Of course, today, it's illegal.
You get your depends what the shift you was on. If you're 6 to 2, you got 11 o'clock. 2 to 10, you got at 5 o'clock with the men. And all the men get their drum at 4:45 or 10 to 5 before they went home. and then the manager or the brewer would come out at 10 o'clock at night and give you a dram and leave it for you all night. So that was the official ones. Non-official ones were just when you come out at 6 in the morning, there was always a dram waiting for you. So you just had your taste first thing in the morning. Then you had one at 11 o'clock, and then you'd have maybe one at 1:30 before you went home. So it was the same at 2 o'clock. Yeah, you'd sneak away and have a quiet one, and then after you get one at 5 o'clock, and then you'd have one at 10 o'clock with the boy coming out at night shift. So it was, we weren't there was no drunks here. We liked the taste, but nothing too drastic.
How did you guys get the unofficial drams?
It was known as milking the cow. You dipped your whisky every time you had a run. You dipped it to see how much was in it. If it was over 100, you could milk a cow. You just had a glass, and one of the other men would hold the glass, and you would just pull, and the spirit just come skating out. So that was milking the cow. You just got enough for a couple of drams, and you got happy with that.
Tommy Smith was also a bagpiper and played for events at Strathisla and other Chivas Brothers distilleries. He too passed away this week, and like Joy, will be missed by all of those who knew them. That's all for this episode of WhiskyCast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com. That's also where you'll find links for our WhiskyCast HD videos and the WhiskyCast Tasting Panel podcast, the latest whiskey news, events, photos, cocktail recipes, and a whole lot more, including a complete archive of all of our past episodes. I hope you'll take a minute or two this week to share WhiskyCast with your friends. If they're not podcast listeners, take a second and show them how to use that podcast app that's already on their smartphone to discover WhiskyCast and a whole world of free content. Remember, friends don't let friends miss out on podcasts. I'd love to hear from you. We're on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast, and the email address is comments@whiskycast.com.
From far beyond the wall comes a whiskey for those who face the oncoming storm and never stop walking. Winter is here. White Walker by Johnny Walker.
White Walker by Johnny Walker. Blended Scotch whiskey, 41.7% alcohol by volume. Imported by Diageo North America, Norwalk, Connecticut. Please drink responsibly.
WhiskyCast. Brought to you by Redbreast, the definitive single pot still Irish whiskey. Those in the know Redbreast.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2019, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.